You are listening to the IoT For All Media Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IoT For All podcast on the IoT For All Media Network. I'm your host, Ryan Chacon, one of the co-creators of IoT For All. Now, before we jump into this episode, please don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or join our newsletter at iotforall.com/newsletter to catch all the newest episodes as soon as they come out. Before we get started, does your business waste hours searching for assets like equipment or vehicles and pay full-time employees just to manually enter location and status data? You can get real-time location and status updates for assets indoors and outdoors at the lowest cost possible with Leverage's end-to-end IoT solutions. To learn more, go to iotchangeseverything.com. That's iotchangeseverything.com. So, without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the IoT For All podcast. Welcome, Robert, to the IoT For All podcast. Thanks for being here this week.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this conversation. I'd love if you could start off by just giving a quick introduction about yourself, background, experience, anything you think would be relevant for our audience.
Yeah, so nice to meet you. My name is Robby Hamblet. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of Teal. My background before founding Teal was in eSIM engineering. So that's actually where I found the problem that I wanted to solve in the market and start a company to solve. So I worked on some very early connected car deployments and found that the way that eSIM was being deployed really wasn't accomplishing its full potential. There were a lot of solutions that were buying platforms and then buying carriers and creating these kind of walled gardens, which were very solution specific, and really wanted to get devices and solutions out of that kind of roaming model as well. There were a lot of shortcuts being used because eSIM is so difficult to work with today. That devices were ending up on networks in an unintended way, both for the solution and for the MNO. So Teal was kind of created to solve that problem. So we're the merger of a credentialing platform, with a connectivity management platform. So we're a credentialing as a service solution. So that means you have access to any MNO that we onboard into our platform. And then you also have the ability to load your own MNOs because we're not running like an MVNO model where it's more of an arbitrage play.
Okay.
So we work with people wanting to access public networks or private networks. We've done a lot of work with the CBRS and private LTE type technologies as well.
Right. That's great. And if you wouldn't mind diving in a little bit more to kind of the story behind the company, more breaking down kind of what the market and landscape look like, the opportunity you saw with your other co-founders, which kind of led to the founding of Teal.
Yeah, I mean, it really goes back to like we were working with the traditional SIM technology companies, and I was working for an MVNE at the time, so like a virtual network enabler, which is basically just like an ultra MVNO, if you will, something that was to try to get solutions onto multiple MVNO networks or to create really large networking solutions. And in that connected car use case, that company had to buy a platform and then buy its carriers individually to integrate into that platform. And then actually when we had the exact same project requirements from another automotive company, we ended up having to buy another eSIM platform specific to that solution. And so like a lot of times in this M2M eSIM space, because there's really two specs, there's consumer and M2M eSIM. And in the M2M enterprise side, these solutions are buying individual platform licenses, and they're going through a lot of steps and work that are really duplicative compared to like consolidating all that work and creating one platform that everybody can plug into and access. So that was the opportunity. It was like, let's end roaming. Let's try to get off of roaming networks. Let's make something that can actually onboard all 800 LTE networks. Like let's create a system for people so that water meter can access the same kind of credentials as a car. Because a car can drive a lot of carrier requirements, but a water meter with 5,000 lines in one state might not be able to get access to a Brazilian operator credential that easily, and certainly doesn't have the resources to pay for a carrier integration into every single operator they would want to do. Let's make it all cloud-based and dynamic and single SKU so that it's really programmatic. It's programmable. It's a layer that you can change based on the use case, and we're not going to discount the higher end opportunities, but we're not going to take solutions off the table for the lower end opportunities that would really benefit from democratized credential access.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And on the from an industry perspective or use case perspective, are there any area that you all particularly focus on or see more business in? And if you could kind of tie that to some active use cases where kind of showcases and highlights the offering, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I think every cellular IoT solution needs to be focused around what makes sense for cellular technology, because you could add cellular technology to like a smart TV and it probably wouldn't matter that much. Like there's maybe not a cost benefit analysis of including that technology. Maybe with private LTE we'll get there, but like right now the cellular networks, it's really about solutions that benefit from independent mobile connectivity. So they don't want to have a backhaul through LAN, or they don't want to have a fixed wireless access point that they need to access. So we focus on a lot of mobility use cases, health tech, ag tech, industrial. Those are kind of the big four, because they all benefit from wide area independently connected devices.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And for our audience out there, I think it'd be good if we could break down kind of exactly what an eSIM platform does and what it is, and what does the current kind of eSIM landscape look like now, as opposed to before you all kind of got into the space a bit more.
Yeah, so there's like eSIM platforms today. A lot of the ways that people work with them, they either get it from an operator, or they get it from an MVNO, or they try to build their own. And there's different principles behind what kind of eSIM platform you're getting. And whoever built the eSIM platform gets to say what you get to do with it, right? Like if you get a eSIM platform from a tier 1 operator in the US, they're probably not going to enable you to then take your devices and use eSIM technology to switch to other tier 1 operators.
Okay.
So they're not neutral. Similarly, an MVNO is likely going to push you towards their core network. They deploy their own P gateways, their own packet cores. They might have radio network access across multiple carriers. So like they could do an AT&T, a T-Mobile, and a Verizon. Right. But it's going to go through their data channel and through their agreements. And so, there's very much like an arbitrage approach. And so you don't have that programmability, you don't have that flexibility. And then you've got the SIM technology providers, which, because they're embedded with every single carrier, they don't offer carrier services. So if you were to talk to like an IDEMIA or a Gemalto or a GND or somebody like that, they don't have the CMP bit, the connectivity management bit. So they can't say, here's a profile that works with this tier 1 operator, and this is what it costs. And we already did all the work of integrating it. Here you go. Like this is something they're focused on selling platform licenses. And so if you're building a solution, you're working with one of those three. There's also the fourth option, which is where you get an eSIM and it doesn't actually have a platform attached to it. So that would be something like Particle, if you were to get one of those boards. And we wrote a great blog about how to superpower a Particle device with a real eSIM. It has an MFF2, but it's just locked to a Movistar MZ. It doesn't do anything else other than that. There's no ability to load your own credentials. There's not even an ability to switch to a different MVNO credential. It's all locked down.
Gotcha. Interesting. And when, I guess, looking at it from a potential customer standpoint, how do most eSIM platforms, you kind of already touched a little bit on this, but how do those eSIM platforms really differ from each other? Kind of just, I guess, breaking it down in non-technical terms, what would somebody see if they were kind of out there in the market looking at different eSIM platforms, and how do they kind of decide between which path to go?
I think the most important thing is, because functionally it's all based on the GSMA specs. So you're gonna, in an M2M solution and an enterprise solution where there's a card and a chip that you're providing to customers, or you're providing to your devices, that's very much a push configuration. So it's all centrally organized. And in a consumer model, it's all pulled. So the device pulls a credential off of a platform. It could be on anybody's platform. because I don't know, or Teal doesn't know Apple's keys, for example. Like I don't know every iPhone's credentials. So it has to come in as a pull request. Most people that are looking for this solution, they're looking at the M2M or the enterprise bit. And because it's all push based, because it's centrally maintained, you really have to evaluate like what are you allowed to do with it? Like how much control do you actually have? And how much does the company that built it or is offering it to you actually maintain that? So, if you talk to an MVNO, there's no MVNOs out there that I'm aware of that are actually building their own code bases. They're all using like an IDEMIA or a Gemalto or a GND or something like that.
Okay.
They're white labeling it, and then they're loading their credentials into it, and they're saying, this is what you can do. You can access our credentials. And MNO, they're trying to form their own partnerships. They're trying to work their way around roaming use cases where traditionally a tier one operator would sign a roaming deal with a European operator between the US and Europe. Now they're seeing this need for local credentials. So they're really just adding eSIM so that they can empower their existing relationships. They're not building something that actually allows you to change out and have that programmatic access that you really want with eSIM, which is to switch carriers when you say so. And even go as far as to load the credentials that you want when you want them.
Gotcha. Okay. I know this plays a really large role, especially when we're talking about IoT, digital transformation, all that kind of good stuff, to help solve the challenges companies face when they're trying to scale globally with a solution. So if you wouldn't mind kind of touching on, from your perspective, what are you seeing are the biggest challenges companies do face when they try to scale globally as it relates to IoT solutions? And then how the eSIM side plays into helping them achieve that.
Yeah, so there's a part of eSIM where it's like it's just making it easier to access those networks because you're now able to download a credential that works there. So like in a use case like Brazil, there's no roaming access allowed. Like it's actually legal to roam into Brazil. So all those solutions that were built on roaming into Brazil. Now they really wish they had built with something that uses eSIM. So there's one aspect of it that's just like, let's make it easier to access those networks. Okay. And then there's another aspect of it where you add the connectivity management side, and it's how do you manage those networks that you've deployed? So you combine the eSIM technology with the management layer. So now you're doing one carrier integration instead of doing 10 different Jasper integrations, instead of doing a bunch of different, Ericsson type integrations. It's one entry point, and then you're able to deploy with the best credential for that market in any market you want to go into, which is combining the just ease of deployment with the actual added functionality of being able to do multiple operators. So we've seen a lot of solutions that they're not just looking for one MNO in the US and one in, like Latvia or something.
Sure.
They're looking for more robust site deployment. So they're looking at the United States and they're saying, well, great, this carrier works well in Utah, but this one has almost nothing in Montana. How can we deploy on both without having, multiple different APIs, multiple different SIM cards? And eSIM really opens up multi-network deployments domestically, like inside of one country as well.
Okay. And this is obviously not just a solution to help scale globally, but also regionally and different, like for instance, if you take the United States, there's different networks around the country. Now, I assume this would also then help with scaling across a certain area that might be smaller as opposed to, global. Yeah.
So we even go as far as to allow for these micro MNOs, these private network operators. So these are like CBRS providers, or they're using some other kind of licensed or unlicensed spectrum to build out like a cellular network on an oil rig or in a mining shaft or something, where cellular technology brings slicing and power control and more bandwidth compared to a Wi-Fi solution. Now they're able to balance those smaller deployments and those regional solutions. And there's plenty of, even more, I guess, even bigger than the mining equipment, but smaller than the public MNOs. There's plenty of regional carriers that exist inside of these countries that have a profile that's more optimal than roaming. And this kind of true eSIM bridges that gap between having to need 3 different SIM cards for those 3 different use cases.
Okay, that makes sense. And how do you all handle, just from your side of things, handle the integration with different networks, different connectivity types? Just like logistically speaking, how does that kind of all work?
Yeah, so we onboard carriers based on what project requirements we have. So right now, we've been a company for 3 or 4 years, and we're adding more and more carriers. Our goal is to integrate 100 carriers next year. We have about 30 different credential types, 30 different carrier credentials that exist in the platform today. And when we onboard them, it's a very streamlined approach, because if you were to buy an eSIM platform and then have to manage that project to integrate, as somebody who's done it a bunch of times, if there's not clear deliverables, the carriers can take like 9 months to actually onboard something. And there's different types of integration points. So there's something called an ES2, which is where the carrier does profile donation into an SMDP. And then there's something called an ES3, which is where there's a SMDP cluster created around one SMSR. And we're probably going beyond like the basic knowledge of a lot of listeners, but those are the 2 types of credential activations or credential integrations that happen with MNOs functionally.
So if you're taking this from the perspective of, an everyday customer that you all speak with, when you have these conversations, what's the easiest way to kind of explain, or I guess, what are the areas that they come to you with the most amount of questions? Is it really about which networks are you on? How much coverage do you have in these certain areas? How easy is it for us to use? Cost? What are the things that they're concerned most about?
I think they're most concerned about actually seeing eSIM technology be utilized, because they've been using a lot of roaming providers. They've been using a lot of multi-IMSI solutions where it's more like a static business logic.
Gotcha.
A lot of the customers really like to see like they set an evaluation criteria with every project. And typically that's, let's land in Montenegro and let's download a carrier there. And then actually showing them that and showing them that they can do that this week. That's really cool. So that's the biggest thing, is programmability. Like, they actually want to see that this thing is dynamic. They're not going to get locked into a SIM card that has 3 phone numbers in it, and it's just going to toggle depending on where you turn it on. Right. And it could be embedded, but that cloud focus, that actual dynamicism to our platform is really what customers like to see.
Gotcha. And when you speak with customers, what advice do you have for these companies during their IoT journey when they're looking to better understand the connectivity side of things, picking the most appropriate connectivity for their use case, and that kind of conversation? How does that usually go? What advice do you usually have for those kinds of companies?
I think you have to evaluate like what the needs are. Like, sometimes people are looking for like a network technology. So they're like, we'd love to use cellular in this deployment. What kind of technology would you recommend? And so, there's 5G subscriptions that work only inside of native operators because there's no 5G roaming. And that's something where our platform is really good at allocating credentials that actually accomplish like 5G access versus like an MVNO that would break that functionality through their own packet core. So we talk about, 5G, we talk about 4G, we talk about what's the best LPWAN technology, which is, really important to IoT devices, obviously, because a lot of them are smaller consumptions. And there's a lot of discussion as to like NB-IoT versus Cat-M, and which one's better for the deployment. It's a lot easier to work with LTE-M. You're a lot less protocol constrained. You can roam if you need to. You have higher bandwidth, so you can actually turn the radio off faster. Right. NB-IoT is better for things that are just, ticking away once a minute, once every 5 minutes, but they're staying camped on the network.
Exactly.
More continuous data stream. Yeah. So we do talk to customers a lot about like what network is best for their type of deployment. And we see kind of the 2 extremes. It's either something that's doing like visual positioning and LiDAR and it's using a lot of data, or it's something very small like an asset tracker. It's going to use kilobytes per month. And then what LPWAN works best.
Okay, I can follow that. That makes a lot of sense. And one of the last questions I want to ask you before we wrap up here is talking about, where these eSIM space was, when before Teal, now Teal exists, and into the future. Where do you see the eSIM space going? What are the biggest needs? What are you most excited about?
I really hope that eSIM creates the network of networks model.
Okay.
That it's been promised, and that it actually democratizes access to these credentials. So, the carriers have their share of the blame, and the SIM technology providers have their share of the blame as to why, when you get a particle device, you can't download an AT&T profile to it, or you can't download a T-Mobile profile or a Verizon profile. It's locked in to that SIM technology provider, locked into the policy that was created at the time. I hope that we get to a more interoperable future. And I think platforms like Teal need to exist to centrally maintain and to organize those carriers, make sure that the requirements are all straightforward as far as what's being allowed to access those networks and under what conditions. I hope that we get to a future where it's very easy for people to build private networks and credential those appropriately. There's just going to be more and more challenges around roaming specifically, where network of networks is really going to be important. And data legislation is going to continue to itch towards more data sovereignty within those countries. Brazil, Singapore, Canada, those are some of the first dominoes to fall. But where that device actually lives, like where that credential came from, that's going to be really important to the future of IoT.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm very excited to kind of see where this space goes. I've spoken to a few other people in the past about this space, not as in depth as we went by for sure, but this has been very insightful, not just for myself, but I think our audience is going to get a ton out of this, because eSIM is a very popular topic, but it's often not easily understood, kind of all the benefits and value of working with different companies and why they should choose one company or the other. And I think you've shed a lot of light on that today. So I really appreciate the time and effort you have coming on here and talking more about this. Is fantastic.
Of course. I hope my enthusiasm for the space really came across. I'm very passionate about breaking down these barriers. To access to just get a SIM card in the past, like you had to take the right person out for a steak dinner.
Right.
We really need to move past that, and the roaming arbitrage models and these things that have made it very difficult for solutions to deploy effectively, like with the right economics and the right technology. So
I couldn't agree more. It's a very interesting space, very exciting space that enables so much on the IoT adoption side, which is what we're all kind of collectively working towards together. So again, I really appreciate your time. Let's wrap up with you just telling us best way for people to follow up and get in contact with you, the company, if they have questions. And is there anything new, exciting coming out from Teal that we should be on the lookout for?
Yeah. So I think I'll start with the last thing. So the things to look out for are, 5G networks are launching on our platform this quarter. So
awesome.
We'll be able to access these, carrier native 5G networks, not running through, a subpar data center or, breaking the packet core throughput that the carrier put in place. They've invested a lot in their networks, and we think natively credentialing is very important.
Cool.
So look for that. I'm sure you'll see lots of announcements on LinkedIn. Best way to reach out, I love taking messages on LinkedIn. I love collecting emails. Robby at tealcom.io. I get my hands dirty on the product side a lot because I'm a product CEO. So I really love to hear about the problems people are facing in the industry and provide guidance, even if it's not something that Teal necessarily can help out with. But just follow us on LinkedIn. That's where we're most active. Twitter, we don't have such a big footprint yet, but I think we do technically have a Twitter. So just tealcommunications.com or tealcom.io is our website as well.
Fantastic. Well, Robert, I really appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation. Look forward to getting this out to our audience in the coming weeks and doing more with Teal whenever we have the chance.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for joining us this week on the IoT For All podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave us a rating or review and be sure to subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you're listening to us on. Also, if you have a guest you'd like to see on the show, please drop us a note at ryan@iotforall.com and we'll do everything we can to get them as a featured guest. Other than that, thanks again for listening and we'll see you next time.